5 years ago today, 3 subprime investment funds at a French bank abruptly collapsed. It was the beginning of what would become the gravest financial crisis since the Depression, one that millions are still struggling to overcome. Today, the U.S. has a new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, as well as regulations that are supposed to ensure risky behavior of banks doesn't threaten the economy again. Yet, in many ways, it's back to business as usual, at least for the big banks that were bailed out. Hardly any banking executives have been prosecuted for wrongdoing, and the vast market for financial derivatives seems as opaque as ever. Bankers complain loudly that new rules will only hurt consumers. And once again, each day seems to bring new reports of questionable conduct at large financial institutions, from the interest rate scandal that has shaken international banks like Barclays to the latest questions about money laundering for Iran. I'm David Gillen, reporting for Business Day Live. Later in the show, I'll be talking about Manchester United ahead of its IPO. But the housing market was at the epicenter of the financial crisis as banks sought to profit from the lucrative mortgage lending business. The subsequent bust put the brakes on that business until now. For some banks, mortgages are back as a source of large gains. I'm joined by Peter Evis from DealBook. Good morning, Peter.
Hi, David.
So you're out on page 1 today with a story that in some ways is not going to shock a lot of people. You know, mortgage rates are at record lows, but it turns out that they would be even lower if, not to put too fine a point on it, banks weren't looking out for themselves quite as much. What exactly is going on here? You're saying rates could have been half a point lower.
Yeah, and if banks were conducting their business like they did, say, 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, then they would be taking less profits for themselves in one part of the market, and as a result, borrowers will be paying less interest on those mortgages.
Okay, now to be clear, banks never seem to tire of finding new fees to hit us with.
Right.
But this is not about fees.
This is not about fees.
This is about how the mortgage market works. Could you just walk us through quickly and clearly?
Yeah.
I know it's a little complicated.
Yeah, it's a very simple way of explaining it. If a bank makes a mortgage over here, it turns around and sells it into the market over there, and in the form of a bond.
Right.
And it's on that trade, as they act like a middleman, that they take this gain. And that gain that they take when they sell the mortgages effectively is much larger than it's ever been.
Wow.
And that's interesting because there's no real strong explanatory factor for it. They say they have all these new costs. Yes, there are some new costs, but I somehow wonder whether or not they can be fully accounted for by the size of this gain.
Okay, now here we are on this 5-year anniversary of the financial crisis, and one thing that bankers complain about all the time are new regulations. Oh, it's going to hurt our business, and we're ultimately going to have to pass that along to the consumer. This will ultimately be bad for the consumer. You buy that?
I think obviously there are some additional costs to the regulation.
They can't robo-sign loans anymore.
Right,
and things
exactly.
Like
Well, I mean, but you know what? Some of these were costs in the business that should always have been paid for in the first place. So, and I think there's some exaggeration as well.
Okay. Now the other thing, again, on this day, you look back over the past 5 years. There's been a dramatic consolidation within the American banking industry. We have a relative handful of big banks that now have come to really dominate the mortgage business in a way that hitherto unseen.
Right, and that's the very interesting fact here is that one bank, Wells Fargo, made 30% of all mortgages in the last 12 months, effectively.
Wow,
and,
1 in 3 American mortgages, one bank.
Yeah, and to me that says, okay, well you must have some pricing power. You must be able to determine what people borrow at, especially as that group of banks gets smaller and smaller. I think one of the things we'll have to watch very closely is whether or not they're exerting too much pricing power.
Do the banks themselves acknowledge that?
Well, I think
or they don't want to even go there.
Right, they kind of don't want to go there. One of the things you do hear, though, is that they actually are straining to deal with all these applications, mainly for refinancings, by the way. This is what the driver is here.
Okay.
And so if they keep the rate up here, it rations the amount of applications they get, some of them say. So that's one of the reasons why they do it. So if you were to cut the rate, you'd have so many more people, and they say their machinery wouldn't be able to deal with that. But on the other hand, if there are a lot more banks making mortgages, rather than just say 3 of them, then you would be able to handle all those applications. So there's 2 sides.
Peter, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
One of the most valuable sports teams on the planet is Manchester United. The English Premier Soccer team is owned by Malcolm Glazer, who's taking it public on the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow. Earlier, I spoke with Stefan Szymanski, one of the authors of the book Soccernomics, to ask him why the team is such a business powerhouse.
They are, in their own right, an iconic club with a global presence. So people worldwide know about Manchester United, and they've known about them for more than 50 years. This is an aspect of globalization, and Manchester United are at the apex of this.
You know, here in New York, you take your kids over to Yankee Stadium, you buy some tickets, decent tickets, a couple hot dogs, a beer maybe. You know, it's an expensive outing. You hear these arguments that that soccer should be regulated somehow, that maybe ticket prices should be controlled, salaries capped, that kind of thing.
Sports work because they represent our communities, and we are prepared to spend a lot of money on our communities. And the issue is that these community assets are actually owned by investors who take money out. Now, because we love our sports franchises so much, in a sense, we can be exploited. And we see it in America, we see it when franchises threaten to leave town unless the city invests money at taxpayer expense in order to build a new stadium. And in England and in other parts of the world, we're seeing investors coming into soccer and saying, well, here's I can make money out of the love that fans have for their team.
Let's hear it for Manchester United. Manchester United just announced a big deal with General Motors. If I'm right, it's $559 million through 2021, and they're going to become Man U's jersey sponsor. And again, by way of context, I mean this is supposed to be the richest deal in soccer. I mean, what do you make of those kind of figures?
The trick here is to exploit the name across as many territories as you possibly can. So, for example, Manchester United selling a shirt sponsorship in England is not such a very big deal because England's a country of 50 million people. So it's a good market, but it's not the same as reaching what they now claim a market of 650 million followers worldwide. Now, again, if you can sell sponsorship and brand name across all of the territories in which those people live, then you really do have a commercial proposition. And the point about this is Manchester United and the soccer world in general is at the beginning of this process, really. There's still a long way to go.
That's all for today. Please stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of this and other stories. I'm David Gillen reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.